Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another Art for All group. This is Christopher's Hospice. My name is Lucy, and I'm a creative artist working with the wellbeing team. It's quite windy here, so please excuse any background noise that you might hear, and I'll try and speak up a bit so that you can hear me. So today, the 23rd of February, I thought I might do something a little bit different, and I thought about different art forms aside from just the visual arts that we all might have been a bit more interested in over the past year. There was obviously the announcement of the easing of measures, the plan for the easing of lockdown measures by the Prime Minister last night. So yeah, hopefully the idea that things are changing. I thought in light of that, and in light of the anniversary that it is today, that I might like to look at writing and diaries. And one of the reasons I wanted to do so was because today is the anniversary of the birthday of Samuel Pepys, who wrote one of the most famous diaries in history. And he wrote during times of great change, during the Great Fire of London, and during the plague in London. So there are a number of plagues that happened in London while Samuel Pepys was alive, but during one of the larger years of plague, he actually wrote about what it was like and how he found things, and in a way that wasn't meant to be read by his contemporaries, but he did want future people to read his diary because he provided a code or a translation code and an index in his diary. So thinking about Samuel Pepys and the plague, maybe thinking in parallel to our own experience at the moment, outbreaks of plague weren't very uncommon in London, as I said. So major epidemics had occurred in 1592, 1603, 1625 and 1636. And Pepys was among the group of people who were not most at risk. So Pepys was actually, like many people in the UK, he wasn't at risk of becoming seriously unwell or dying from the plague. Actually, the people who were most affected by the plague are the people who are most affected by coronavirus now. People who live in cramped housing, people who maybe don't have as much money as other people, and people who live in inner city environments, and people who are older and maybe have underlying health conditions. These are the people who are most affected by the plague. But it was 1665 that was the really very difficult year of the plague, and it was unusually serious. A historian writes of Samuel Pepys, because he wasn't one of these groups that was most affected by the plague, that Claire Tomalin writes that the most notable fact about Pepys's plague year is that to him it was one of the happiest of his life. In 1665 he worked very hard, and the outcome was that he quadrupled his fortune. In his annual summary on the 31st December, he wrote, "I have never lived so merrily, besides that I never got so much as I have done this plague time." So it's interesting to hear that Samuel Pepys did well out of the plague. He had 4 times as much money as when he started. And to think that even in the age we're living in, there are some people who are doing well out of coronavirus. There's some people who are being able to be more creative, who are able to write more, have more time to spend with friends and family if they live with them. For some people it's been positive. For many of us it's not been, but it's interesting to see that flip side of what I suppose very serious events can cause to occur. But with all of Pepys's happiness in this year, he was very concerned about the plague. And on the 16th of August in 1665, he wrote, "But Lord, how sad a sight it is to see the streets empty of people, and very few upon the change, jealous of every door that one sees shut up, lest it should be the plague, and about us 2 shops in 3, if not more, generally shut up." Which he could be writing today. It's uncanny, just the thinking about all the shops in London being closed down, 2 out of 3 shop fronts not being open, people worried to go near each other, people worried about different doors. And we're coming out of that now. It feels like, but it is uncanny that he was writing that, and that was hundreds of years ago, and suddenly we're back in that. It's a yeah. Other ideas that Peeps had about preventing the plague, not things that I would advise. He also chewed tobacco as a protection against infection, and he very much worried that wig makers might be using hair from the deceased as a raw material to make wigs. Obviously, he would have worn wigs because he was a middle class gentleman. Peeps actually suggested that the Navy office should evacuate to Greenwich, although he did offer to remain in town himself, and he later took great pride in his stoicism. So actually, some of the Navy moving to Greenwich was down to Samuel Pepys and the Great Plague. So there we go. Different bits I didn't know about Samuel Pepys. And thinking about Pepys's diary and his experiences in difficult times, I thought I'd look at other diary entries written either on this day in years past or around about this day. So some diary entries I couldn't get quite the right day, or they weren't they weren't as interesting as maybe other days around the date. But for the most part, the diary entries I'll read to you are on February the 23rd in the year that they were written. So then the first entry I will read was actually Nelson Mandela's last ever day in prison, which was at the end of January. And rather than read what he had for dinner on the February the 23rd, this is a slightly more interesting entry. And maybe there's something about, for all of us coming out of prison at the moment, coming out, there's light at the end of the tunnel. And this is what Nelson Mandela wrote when he was about to be set free. Flock of ducks walks clumsily into the lounge and loiter about, apparently unaware of my presence. Males with loud colours, but keeping their dignity and not behaving like playboys. Moments later, they become aware of my presence. If they got a shock, they endured it with grace. Nevertheless, I detect some invisible feelings of unease on their part. It seems as if their consciences are worrying them. And although I feared that very soon their droppings will decorate the expensive carpet, I derive some satisfaction when I notice that their consciences are worrying them. Suddenly they squawk repeatedly and then file out. I was relieved. They behave far better than my own grandchildren. They always leave the house upside down. So Nelson Mandela thinking about his surroundings on the day when he was about to be released, and the ducks can just go as they choose, come and go. And maybe one day we'll be free to do that, though I'm sure we won't all be looking to ruin carpets as we go. Next, I wanted to read a diary entry from February 1942. This is from the diary of Lena Mukina, and she was a 16-year-old girl who lived through the siege of Leningrad in the Second World War, which was, all the people of Leningrad were under siege for, I think, over 900 days. It was many, many, many people starved to death. So this is a more difficult diary entry. And in contrast to perhaps what Peeps was writing, what Nelson Mandela was writing, this maybe has it's more difficult going. And it's from February. When I first wake up in the morning, to begin with, I don't realise that my mother has really died. It seems that she is here, lying in her bed, that she is about to wake up and we are going to talk about how we will live our life after the war. But the frightening reality takes over. My mother isn't here. Mother isn't alive, and neither is Akka. I am on my own. It's impossible to understand. At times I am overwhelmed by rage. I want to howl, to yelp, to hit my head on a wall and to bite. How on earth am I going to live without my mother? The room is falling into squalor. Every day there is more and more dust. I am probably going to turn into Pushkin soon. Am I really going to be consumed by laziness? Am I such a faithful copy of my mother? No, but I love it so much when it is tidy and cosy in a room. No and no and no again. I am going to get up now, it's warm in here, and tidy the room, except I don't know where to begin. I'm going to hang up the curtains first. They will make it feel cozier straight away. Now, this is how it is. I have 97 rubles. Ida Isayevna will bring me another 100. I have to find a job, but I think that I can survive February without it. There are 17 days left. Bread, 17 rubles, equals 865 kopecks. It seems that the supply of food is improving. Yesterday all the shops were giving grains for the new ration cards. Dependents get 250 grams, but since I am using the canteen I get much less. Yesterday, without having to queue at all, I bought 125 grams of peas and 200 grams of millet and made such exquisite millet kasha, it was bliss. Yesterday I also ate 600 grams of bread, a small pot of lentil soup and a plate of millet kasha, and I didn't feel well. It's very understandable, we have all been so starved and this amount of food is already too much for us. Sweet, darling, most loved mother, you didn't make it to the improvement by only a few days. It's so sad and painfully disappointing for you. You died on the morning of the 7th, while bread rations already got bigger on the 11th, and grain was distributed on the 12th. Dear God, how am I going to live on my own? I cannot imagine it. Not at all. No, I am going to leave and go to Xenia's. All the people around here are strangers. I am so unhappy. God, merciful God, what is it for? What is it all for? So, a very, very different diary entry. And I think maybe reflecting the flip side of Nelson Mandela's hope. She's still in the middle of the siege. Things are starting to get better, but she lost her mother and her family. And maybe there's something about people are still dying from coronavirus. The deaths have gone down, but there will still be people who die. And even though things are getting better, it's how we hold on to the future and the past at the same time. It's diaries as ways to just note down our thoughts and for her just to get this out of her head when there was nobody else to talk to. That would have been very, very powerful. Next, I'd like to go on to Scott of the Antarctic, another very famous diary. And this was on February 23rd, 1912. So, February 23rd, 1912. Lunch temperature, minus 9.8. Supper temperature, minus 12. Started in sunshine, wind almost dropped. Luckily, Bowers took a round of angles, and with the help of the chart, we fogged out that we must be inside rather than outside tracks. The data was so meagre that it seemed a great responsibility to march out, and we were none of us happy about it. But just as we decided to lunch, Bowers' wonderful sharp eyes detected an old double lunch cairn, and the theodolite telescope confirmed it, and our spirits rose accordingly. This afternoon we marched on and picked up another cairn, then on and camped only 2.5 miles from the depot. We cannot see it, but given fine weather we cannot miss it. We are therefore extraordinarily relieved. Covered 8.2 miles in 7 hours, showing we can do 10 to 12 on this surface. Things are again looking up, as we are on the regular line of cairns with no gaps right home, I hope. So, another message of hope. And finally, probably the most famous diary of recent centuries, the Diary of Anne Frank. And this is a more hopeful message. And it was written on the 23rd of February, 1944. She wrote, "The best remedy for those who are frightened, lonely, or unhappy is to go outside, somewhere they can be alone, alone with the sky, nature, and God." And with that, I hope that you found this interesting, perhaps inspiring, and that you might want to try writing your own diaries. It can be really powerful to, rather than even speak to another person, to speak to yourself but on the page, and to create a record of what we've all been through. Some of you might already have been keeping diaries, and to look back on in the future. Thank you very much for joining today, and I look forward to seeing you again next week. All the best.